Thank you. I thought I would read for something like 15 minutes, and then we'll do Q&A, which is what people seem to like most at these things. And then there's a sort of signing program that'll happen after that. So I'm just going to start reading. This is fairly early in the book. It happens about maybe 20 years in the future. It's 4 Princeton students who are driving from east to west across the country. It's the beginning of summer. They've all got internships lined up for the summer, and so they've decided to drive around and see some of the country. And they're traveling across a state here, which happens to be Iowa, but it could be any state in the Union at this point. And they're passing through an area where it's considered advisable to have an armed escort. So in a separate vehicle, there's a couple of guys, one of whom is named Tom, who are locals who have hired themselves out to perform the escort duty. So they've been driving along for some time, seeing windmills, wind turbines. And the point of view character here is Sophia. The other people in the car are Phil and Julian and Anne Solène. That was how the giant flaming cross of the Leviticans sneaked up on her, though the people working on it would probably have felt that she sneaked up on them. It wasn't actually flaming. It wasn't even capable of flaming yet because it wasn't finished. Its general size and shape were not terribly far off from that of a wind turbine. It was sighted on the top of what passed for a hill around here, not to catch the wind, but to be seen from a distance as it burned in the night. Anyway, by the time she accepted that she was actually seeing it, the thing was less than a mile away. She could see a clutter of pickup trucks parked around its base and some pop-up canopies, sheltering tables where workers could take water breaks. A row of portable toilets stood sentry next to an office trailer. On an impulse, she opened a voice channel to Tom. In normal circumstances, his edit space and Sophia's were totally disjoint. They would never encounter each other online, never meet, never see the same news stories. Anything that originated from the likes of Tom would be fastidiously pruned by the algorithms used by Sophia's editor before human eyes ever reviewed it, and anything that came from Princeton or Seattle would never reach Tom's feed until it had been bent around into propaganda, whose sole function was to make Tom afraid and angry. But for today's purposes, they had a direct channel, unfiltered, unedited. "Hey," she said, "how do you think those people would feel about our dropping in for a visit? Just, in tourist mode." "Copy. Stand by," Tom returned. The sound of Sophia's voice had broken her companions out of their media reverie, and so now came several moments of their pushing up their glasses, being astonished by the spectacle of the cross, talking about it, pulling glasses back down to search for more information. "There's a visitor center," Tom reported, "with changing rooms, probably easiest unless you want to have all your garments inspected." "Well, if there's a visitor center, they must be okay with visitors," Sophia said. Phil, Julian, and Anne Solène could not hear Tom's audio stream, and so the changing rooms came as a surprise to them. They were in separate trailers for men and women. All of the Princetonians knew that it would be pointless and probably inflammatory to make inquiries about non-gender binary cases. But the idea of having to don different garments just to set foot on a specific property was new to them. "If we don't, they'll have to stone us to death," Sophia explained. And according to their interpretation of Leviticus, the modern equivalent of stoning people is shooting them. "Oh, I get it," Phil said, "because bullets are like little rocks." "Exactly, and a gun is just a modern labor-saving device that makes it easier to throw the little rocks really fast." Basically, to them, every reference to stoning in the Bible is a sort of dog whistle reference to guns. Phil was working it out. God knew guns would be invented in the future because omniscient, but he couldn't insert direct references to them in the Bible because that would be a spoiler for the Bronze Age audience. So he used stoning as a placeholder. "And our clothing is immodest or something?" Julian asked. Not at all. Sophia reached out as if to grab Julian by the scruff of the neck, instead of which she flipped the collar of his t-shirt inside out so that she could read the tag. Mostly cotton, but with some spandex, to make it stretchy, I guess. If you wore this up there, they would have to stone, i.e. shoot you. They have something against spandex? Against mixing fibers. Sophia pointed to a sign mounted to the wall above a table on which a display of neatly folded white paper bunny suits had been laid out in a range of sizes. The sign was a quote from the Bible set in Comic Sans. Ye shall keep mine ordinances. Thou shalt not let thy cattle gender with others of divers kinds. Thou shalt not sow thy field with mingled seed, neither shall a garment of divers things as of linen and woolen come upon thee. Leviticus 19:19. Phil couldn't get past the first bit. Is that a proscription of bestiality between different kinds of animals? Shh, said Anne Solène, for sitting nearby was a lady of perhaps 60, monitoring a table of cookies and coffee, free but in classic Midwest passive-aggressive style, with a jar for suggested donations. I guess they were anti-mule. Look, point being, we can either strip down and have her read all the labels on our garments, which is gross, or just change into the bunny suits. What about him? Julian asked, gesturing toward Tom, who was emerging from the men's toilet. Then, realizing he had been a little rude, he turned to address Tom directly. Tom, are you going to change clothes? No need, Tom said, and went into a curious routine of patting himself in various places. All of his garb was tactical, mil-spec, rugged, and grueling, even down to suspenders and socks. All of the tags were on the outside, not concealed in collars and waistbands as was the normal practice, which wasn't obvious because the tags were tactical, camo, olive drab, or what have you, so that they wouldn't stand out in a faraway sniper's scope like stars in the night sky. The Princetonians now all felt at liberty to approach and examine. The lettering and logos on the tags were subdued tactical colors and difficult to read until you got close. But all of them, along with the manufacturer's logos and the incomprehensible laundry glyphs, bore a symbol consisting of a block letter L with a crossbar near the top and flames coming out of it. It's just easier to wear Levitican-approved shit, he explained, because of where I go in the line of duty sometimes. So you don't believe it? Phil asked. Oh, fuck no, said Tom, but they do, and it's real good clothing, tactical. They changed into bunny suits, but not before the cookie warden had beckoned Sophia and Anne Solène over to the refreshment table and asked them, sotto voce, whether it was for either of them that time of the month. Both answered in the negative and exchanged a look meaning, let's just not even go there. Later, they could consult Leviticus as to what limits and penalties might apply to women who were on the rag. Oh, the KKK libel. Good question. Glad you asked. That is one of the greatest misconceptions, said Ted, son of Aaron, as he was identified on the name tag clipped to his 100% cotton tactical bib overalls. He removed his gleaming white hard hat as if the mere mention of the KKK libel had put him at risk of blowing his stack. The warm summer breeze streamed through his thinning gray hair and might have evaporated a small fraction of the sweat streaming over his scalp. After a moment, he glanced up as if checking the sky for an angry Jehovah, but nothing was there except blue sky strewn with fluffy clouds and the steel crossbar of a 200-foot-tall cross. Not currently flaming, the pipe fitters had not finished the work needed to conduct natural gas out to its system of burners. My wife will skin me, he remarked, if we don't get under cover. Let's duck in here so I can set you all straight. Why will she skin you? Anne Solène asked curiously as they followed Ted into the shade of a pop-up canopy. Julian got distracted en route by 3 lambs gamboling in a makeshift chicken wire pen. Melanoma, Ted answered. Have to go into Iowa City. This remark was mumbled in a distracted way as he was getting a voice call, faintly and tinnily audible to them on the flip-up earplugs cantilevered out from the bows of his safety glasses. He indexed those down into his ears and answered the call, excusing himself with a nod and donning his hard hat as he stepped out into the sun and ambled over toward the livestock pen. His duties as son of Aaron apparently encompassed not just construction management, but inspection of sacrificial lambs. A junior crew member bustled in to accommodate the visitors. He pulled a couple of folding chairs off of a stack and set them up at a folding table. This was strewn with printed documents kept from blowing away by rocks and ammunition magazines. He rearranged those to make a bit of space. "Y'all can help yourselves to water and iced tea," he said, nodding toward a pair of insulated coolers on a smaller table nearby. Until he spoke, Sophia had guessed he was in his late 20s, but now she thought 18. "I'd fetch it myself, but my hands is filthy." He held them up as proof and flashed a grin that would have been brilliant had his teeth been all present and not brown. "Thank you so much. We will definitely help ourselves," Sophia said loudly and distinctly, since the young man had his earplugs in. The reference to Iowa City? Anne Solène asked. That was where they had stayed last night, in a boutique hotel next to a tapas bar. Where the big hospital is, so another country to them, but they have to go there when they get sick, like to get a melanoma whacked off or whatever. They can't afford blue state hotel rooms or food, so they have to camp out on the periphery and cook over propane burners under tarps. Not a fun time. Anne Solène nodded. "Dentistry?" she said. "Ted has normal people teeth because he is old and grew up before this part of the world got Facebooked. After that, the people with education fled to places like Ames, Des Moines, Iowa City, which includes dentists. A few mainline churches used to run charity dental clinics here where you could get a bad tooth pulled or whatever, but those are being chased away by these people." Not wanting to be obvious, she glanced over at the gigantic cross. She took a sip of iced tea and grimaced. "That bad?" Anne Solène asked. "Sweet. Another cultural signifier. When we get to my aunt and uncle's place, they'll serve it unsweetened, northern style." The two women walked slowly back to the table, taking in the scene. Over by the livestock pen, Ted was explaining something to Julian, who looked dismayed. Most of the space around the site was given over to parking for workers' pickup trucks. Not a single one had a license plate, but they were decked out with a range of stickers, a mix and match of stars and bars, "Don't Tread on Me," and what Phil had designated the full Moab. In the center, "Remember," or "Remember Moab," or simply Moab, bracketed between a mushroom cloud and a profile silhouette of a man with a bowed head. "Now let me take the bull by the horns as far as the KKK libel." Ted had returned from inspecting the lambs. He set his weary bones down into a folding chair and indicated that the visitors should do likewise. Phil preferred to stand. He unzipped his paper coverall down to his navel, parted it to expose his chest, and stood sideways to them, trying to catch the breeze. Sophia cataloged it as a microaggression, the 100th today, not even worth noticing next to the 20-story macroaggression that Ted and his crew were building. You couldn't wear underwear beneath the bunny suit because that would miss the whole point unless your underwear was made of Leviticans-certified unmingled fiber, and hers wasn't, so her bra was down in a locker at the checkpoint, and she couldn't unzip as Phil was doing. She sat down next to Anne Solène. Ted's nervous hands sorted and stacked documents, contracts by the look of them, as he calmly dismantled the KKK libel. "Obviously, you are not a white person, at least not 100%, he said, evaluating Sophia, "and I don't know about him." He cast a glance over at Julian, who was down on one knee feeding a handful of grass through the chicken wire to a lamb. Julian was part Chinese. "There's been all kinds of confusion about the Leviticans." This was the church of which he was a priest. "Some kind of imagined link to the Ku Klux Klan." "Maybe it's because of the burning crosses," Phil suggested, deadpan, gazing across a few yards of gravel to the massive concrete foundation from which the cross's steel verticals erupted. Bracketed neatly to the structural members were tubes carrying the natural gas from an underground pipeline. The actual burners didn't start until maybe 20 feet above ground level, maybe because they didn't want to roast parked vehicles. "Supposedly, the KKK burned crosses," Ted said with a roll of the eyes. "There's no supposedly about it," Anne Solène started in. "What do you even... That's like saying supposedly Muhammad Ali was a boxer. Supposedly Ford makes cars. It's..." But Sophia silenced her with a hand on the arm. There was no point. "If that is even true, it has no connection to our burning crosses, which have a completely different significance," Ted announced. Sophia said, "Okay, and that is?" "So-called Christianity, as it existed up until recently, is based on a big lie," Ted explained. "The most successful conspiracy of all time. And it was all summed up in the symbolism of the cross. Every cross you see on a mainstream church or worn as jewelry or on a rosary or what have you was another repetition of that lie. And what is that lie exactly? Phil asked. He already knew, but he and the others all wanted to hear a living human actually say it, just as spectacle. That Jesus was crucified. There, he'd said it. No one could speak. Ted took their silence as a request for more in the same vein. That the Son of God, the most powerful incarnate being in the history of the universe, allowed himself to be scourged and humiliated and taken out in the most disgraceful way you can imagine. Taken out means murdered? Anne Selene asked. It was a rhetorical question that Ted answered with the tiniest hint of a nod. The church that was built on the lie of the crucifixion, Ted continued, had two basic tenets. One was the lovey-dovey Jesus who went around being nice to people, basically just the kind of behavior you would expect from the kind of beta who would allow himself to be spat upon, to be nailed to a piece of wood. The second was this notion that the Old Testament no longer counted for anything. We have exposed all that as garbage, nonsense, a conspiracy by the elites to keep people meek and passive. The only crosses you'll see in our church are on fire. And the symbolism of that has nothing to do with the KKK. It means we reject the false church that was built upon the myth of the crucifixion. So to be clear, all Christianity for the last 2,000 years, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, evangelical, is just flat out wrong, Phil said. That is correct. The four Gospels? Ted shook his head. That's the first thing the church did, was enshrine those Gospels, telling the story they wanted to tell about the meek liberal Jesus who gave food away to poor people and healed the sick, and so on. And was crucified, Sophia prompted him. Ted nodded. And resurrected? Anne Selene asked. They needed some way to explain the fact that he was still alive, so they invented all that resurrection stuff. So where'd Jesus go after that? What did he do? Fought the Romans, went back and forth between this world and heaven. He has the power to do that. Where is he now? We don't know. Maybe here. He has been in eclipse for 2,000 years. The conspiracy of the church was powerful. They staged a fake reformation to get people to believe that reform was possible, all a show orchestrated from the Vatican. So Martin Luther was running a false flag operation for the Pope, Phil said. In that case, but he broke off as he felt Sophia stepping on his toe under the table. He looked down at her. Having caught his eye, she panned her gaze across the entire scene, asking him to take it all in, reminding him that this wasn't Princeton. This was Ameristan, Facebooked to the molecular level. Professor Long, she muttered, the red card. It was a reference to one of their teachers at Princeton who had gone so far as to print up a wallet card for people to keep in front of them during conversations like this one. One side of the card was solid red with no words or images and was meant to be displayed outward as a nonverbal signal that you disagreed and that you weren't going to be drawn into a fake argument. The other side, facing the user, was a list of little reminders as to what was really going on. 1, speech is aggression. 2, every utterance has a winner and a loser. 3, curiosity is feigned. 4, lying is performative. 5, stupidity is power. So that's the end of the reading. Thanks. So after that cheerful introduction, it's time to do questions.
Hi, Neal. Thanks for coming to Google. My question has to do with your book, Fall. And I was curious, when you were working on your book, did you consult with any cognitive neuroscientists?
You know, other than reading kind of some available stuff, I didn't, because this is a different approach to the science than I've used in some of my other books. So, for example, in Seven Eves, I went to a fair amount of effort to try to make the science kind of science-based. So, I mean, I paid a lot of attention to rocket engines and delta V's and trajectories and that kind of thing, because that was part of that was a driver in the book. And in this case, I didn't want to go there. I didn't think it would help move this particular story along. So what I'm doing here is sort of taking a particular theory, or not even a theory, but a way of thinking about what the brain is, how it works, and just running with it. Say, okay, if I grant that, if I say that that's true, what kind of a story can I write around it? So compared to some of my other stuff, this is soft as opposed to hard sci-fi, and if you read it in the hopes of finding any legitimate neuroscience or cog-sci or even computer science content in it, you'll probably be disappointed.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I have 2 tattoos. One of them is this one, and I'm really looking forward to this book.
Yeah.
And the other one is this one, which you may
Nice.
recognize.
Yeah.
I got it when I graduated from math grad school.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you have any plans for more math books like Anathema.
So strangely enough, of all the books I've ever published, that one got the highest position on the New York Times bestseller list. So it hit 3, and Fall hit 4. Which causes me to wonder if people understood what they were getting into. So I'm certainly not against, writing more stuff that gets into those kinds of topics. I'd say it's more about philosophy of math, or a particular way of thinking about what math is. I'm not sure if I can get much more mileage out of, frankly.
That's great.
But thanks for the vote of confidence, if that's what that was.
By the way, you exactly straddled where I finished reading last night, which is
Okay.
so I had to follow along so I wouldn't have to reread it. But as an amateur short fiction writer, I drop about 9 out of 10 of what I think are usable ideas on the floor just for lack of time. When you write stuff that's 1,000 pages long, how do you decide what ideas are worth spending that much time on?
Are you talking about the idea for a whole book, or ideas that sort of come along during the?
Well, I think it's for the whole book. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I was trying to make the point that I'm guessing you probably have more ideas for things you could write about than you have time to write about them, and so I was curious.
Not a lot more. I mean, it's certainly not a 1 in 10 ratio. It's closer to 1 in 2, or maybe less than that. So usually I've got a very limited set. Sometimes I've really only got one viable idea at the moment when I'm ready to begin working on the next book. Sometimes I might have 2. Right now I feel like I've got maybe 2. So I don't know why that is, but maybe there's more of an internal sort of culling process that goes on.
I also suspect your attention span is longer.
Well, I'm trying to keep it that way. It's a challenge. Hi.
Hey, so it seems that Fall integrates a lot of ideas from your other books, bringing in characters and also concepts. Is it your last book? And if not, what's in the future?
Time will tell, but it's not intended to be my last book, certainly. It was a way to close some loops that were open from some earlier stuff that I've worked on. It all just kind of fell together that way. And then I've got some notions on what to do next, but it felt good to sort of close some of those open action items, and maybe move on now to more new stuff. Thanks for asking.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering if, because I think a lot of other fantasy sci-fi authors have moved away from the really large books, whether I guess it helps with sales or shipping costs, or I don't really know why, but you have not. And I was wondering why your books tend to be so long. Because my guess is that there's a conscious decision not to split them into sequels.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if that helped with the writing process, if that's just not the kind of writer you want to be, or if there's another reason.
Yeah, I think you're right about the splitting. So the Baroque cycle internally is 8 books. Cryptonomicon internally is 2 books. Reamd is 2, and Fall is 2. So back in the day, it's possible that instead of a smaller number of great big fat books, that I would have been published as a great big shelf of paperbacks. I'm pretty agnostic as to which approach is used. And after the Baroque cycle came out in hardcover, we pushed the idea for a while of trying to bring it out as 8 separate mass market paperbacks, which I think would have been cool, but it didn't work. The basic question isn't shipping costs or the other things that you mentioned. The basic thing is that people tend not to be crazy about cliffhangers at the end of a book. And so to avoid that, it kind of moves you into a rhythm where you're trying to bring each component book to a nice, neat conclusion while leaving the door open, which is why you tend to see a lot of kind of episodic series in, say, in crime fiction. At the end of each book, the crime gets solved, and so it's not a cliffhanger, but the door is still open for that detective to go solve some other case in the future. So, and in my case, the stuff that I write tends not to break down that way. There's always it always would feel somewhat cliffhanger-ish, and so that's why these things tend to get combined together into big books. Also, people just like large. And, you look at Game of Thrones, or I was watching Chernobyl last night. That's a multi-hour experience. People love that. Mm-hmm. People like big, immersive things that they can get into and spend a lot of time with. So,
Gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hi.
Hi, I'm Asim Williams, a junior now, computer science major at Howard University. I've just gotten into the space of reading science fiction, and I've actually just started reading Snow Crash, which is my introductory to your work. But as a prolific writer in this space, how do you think about looking at technologies now and seeing which ones are going to be influential and important in the future, and what consequences they're going to have, for better or for worse? And when you try to think of ideas that you set 20 years or however long in the future, do you use a historical background, or do you look more at observing what's happening now and then just taking what you think would intuitively happen next?
Well, I think reading history is always super valuable. I think it's the most valuable thing you can do as prep for fiction writing. I have in books like Snow Crash, The Diamond Age, I tend to throw out a lot of ideas. It's kind of a shotgun approach where, every page has got multiple ideas on it that seem like they would make sense. And what has happened over time is that some things have actually been implemented in the real world that in some cases resemble some of those ideas. So Google Earth being a pretty conspicuous example. So then you get into this question of, first of all, there's a whole bunch of ideas in those books that didn't get implemented, that never became reality. And people are very generous to me and very kind in ignoring all of those. And then a lot of the stuff that does seem like it got implemented, you can ask the question of, it's kind of obvious, right? I mean, so Google Earth, is a thing that certainly would have been implemented and created regardless of whether anybody wrote about it in a science fiction novel. But the science fiction can serve I think a useful role in a sort of engineering environment by creating a vision of a thing that could be that everyone shares. So a lot of times in engineering organizations, there's an enormous amount of effort that goes into getting everybody working on the same project at the same time. Lots of PowerPoint, lots of planning meetings, just to get people working toward the same shared vision. And that can be very expensive and tedious and failure prone, but if something like that can be summed up in a fictional setting, that people read the book and they say, okay, we're doing that. See page 85, what happened there, that's what we're doing. And it sort of enables, in some cases, makes it possible to bypass a lot of the bureaucracy of engineering and get people kind of working on a shared idea.
Good afternoon. Really enjoyed Fall. I had a
thanks.
question about the trajectory of Fall.
Uh-huh.
About halfway through, you start exploring mythology more within the digital realm.
Uh-huh.
And, coming from Moab and Ameristan, it kind of loses a little bit of that external digital world.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering about that decision.
Uh-huh.
And also kind of, it seems like the characters within that second half, you've kind of set up large characters in a few places, but a lot of the characters coming in end up in fairly small roles. You haven't expanded like the universe of how many people are interacting there. And so I'm wondering kind of why you made those choices versus, perhaps different ones that might have made more minor characters more powerful or whatever.
Yeah, so the book does take a decided turn towards the middle, where it stops being the sort of near future techno thriller kind of style of book set in our world and turns towards being more of a high fantasy novel that is set in bit world, the kind of digital afterlife. And this was always part of the plan. But I ended up discussing it quite a bit with my publisher and other people I sort of trust to give me good advice about things, because it is for a lot of readers, it's an unexpected direction that the story goes in, and a lot of people who may be happy reading the techno thriller part of the book suddenly find themselves reading something very different, and it's a bit of a weird shift. So I did some tinkering with it to kind of even that balance a little bit, and ended up with the result that you see there. And I think a lot of it is just what you're interested in. So the stuff about Moab, Ameristan, the stuff that happens in the real world in the first part of the book is me trying to tee up some things that will then pay off in an indirect way later. And I'm sort of the plot imposes on me kind of a requirement that I need to be writing. The chronology forces me to write things in the near future, starting a few years from now and continuing to maybe 20 years from now and beyond. So I'm trying to do my best to come up with a future that I feel is plausible and that follows from where we are now. And that ends up feeling quite topical, I think, and very engaging if that's what you're interested in. And then it sort of, like I said, turns into a different book about halfway through. So that's the book I wrote. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for coming to Google. It's been great to see you. I've enjoyed all of your works. Especially I liked the hacker ethos in Cryptonomicon, and in the beginning was the command line. I think that and I think that the hacker ethos in particular influenced Google's internal culture. It's nice to see that reflected in other works as well. Do you have, since you seem to love technology, do you have personal hobby projects you're working on, or any technologies you like or especially don't like?
Yeah, I mean, I work part-time at Magic Leap, working on some content development R&D here in Seattle, which enables me to exercise some of those muscles a little bit in various ways. I have a basement shop with a lot of the usual complement of maker-ish gear, the 3D printer, the 3D router, CAD, system, and all of that stuff. So yeah, I'm always pursuing various projects in that vein. I have a family connections into BattleBots, and so do a little bit of monkeying around with that stuff. So yeah, I'm always puttering away on maker-ish kinds of projects just to give me something to do during the second half of my day.
Thanks.
Sure.
Hi, Neal.
Hi.
Thanks for coming over. Your book, Cryptonomicon, was actually, it was one of the two most influential books I've ever written, and it sort of set me on the path that's landed me here at Google and what I do for a living.
Yeah.
I have two questions. Is it true that you wrote the Baroque cycle in longhand?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's not significantly harder or slower than typing it. So.
Your publisher must have loved it.
Oh no, I type everything in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't present it to them in that form, although it would be entertaining. The manuscript is 42 inches high.
Wow.
So it used to be on display at the Science Fiction Museum over under the Space Needle. No, I get it to a certain point in longhand, and then I just type it into a text document and use tech to format it and print it out.
Right. Secondly, I have a question about one of your recurring characters, and I'm sure you know who it is. Can you talk at all about Enoch Root?
Well, sure, but I prefer not to get into him too directly or pointedly, because part of what I think people find interesting about him is the sort of the mystery and what the hell is this guy kind of thing. But he just wandered into the Baroque cycle very early because I felt it would be a good thing to have a wizard.
Always is.
It's always like, how can you go wrong having a wizard? But I wanted him to be my wizard, and for him to have some characteristics that differentiated him from other literary wizards. And so he just kind of took shape over time, and he shows up in fall. And I think if you read Fall, you can gather some hints as to kind of what's going on with him a little bit. There's the biblical Enoch is a sort of a curiosity in the Bible, because he is he's early enough in the Bible that it's they're still telling you when everybody dies. Like the first, dozen or so characters who show up in the Bible, when they kick the bucket, it says how old they were and when it happened. But Enoch never dies in the Bible.
Okay.
It just
I thought you were
says,
going to say Enoch Root never dies.
yeah. So you can look him up, and I mean, it's It's probably just an oversight, but but for people who spend a lot of time poring over the Bible for a long time, it was a tremendously significant fact about that one character. So there's a hint.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, thanks for coming in. I really enjoyed all your books. A lot of them have kind of a complex structure. I was kind of curious how you outline that, and like when you write, is it kind of linear, or do you jump around a lot? How do you actually kind of pull that together?
Yeah, I tend to go sequential. I find that writing out of sequence tends to create problems without solving any problems. So I like to go sequential, and I just try to keep in my head the general idea of what is going to happen in what order. I don't make outlines as such. I don't keep a written document that summarizes what's going to happen where, because frankly, it's just not that much information to keep in one's head. And one's head is an excellent place to keep it because you can change it easily when it's in your head. And you don't spend time sort of going through all your documents trying to find the outline. I just kind of make it up as I go along. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
He asked the exact question I was going to ask.
Oh. Okay then. Well, we got 17 minutes left. Do you have any other?
So I feel that you picked the section to read from the book, kind of perhaps targeted towards this audience and where we are today. What other thoughts would you like us to walk away with?
Well, I think the situation we're in right now is a dire situation because we, in kind of a fit of absent-mindedness, we obliterated the foundation for our civilization, which is people agreeing on what is factual reality. It just sort of happened. I don't think anyone set out to do it, but if you look at the Constitution of the United States, for example, or the unwritten Constitution of the UK, and probably other constitutions as well, the idea is how do you get a bunch of people to function together as a civilization even though they don't agree about everything? But I think what's kind of always been assumed is that people would have the same basically the same perceptions of what factual reality was. And then they might, from there, arrive at different opinions about what the right policy was, how to interpret those facts, but there was at least a shared perception of what was going on. So when we lose that, and I think that process has been accelerated quite a bit by hostile state actors. But when we lose that ability to agree on what reality is, then the institutions we built, the Constitution, the system of checks and balances, they fail because they didn't take that possibility into account. So I'm really interested to see where things go now. And they could go in a bunch of different directions. I think that with deep fakes, we're at a point now where no mediated experience can be taken at face value ever again, basically. So when television came along, or even radio came along, it began this process where millions of people could kind of share experiences or sort of through media know things at the same time, and that's over now, which is really interesting. So now the only things you can know and be sure really happen are things that you personally experienced. Like if you're in the room with somebody when they say a thing, you can be pretty sure that they said it. But if you saw it on a screen, you have no idea. It could be a deep fake. So I think that's a really interesting, premise for science fiction going forward is what does society look like where you can't trust or believe anything that you haven't seen with your own eyes? Because the opposite of everything that has happened since the advent of radio and television. I hope we'll find a way through and that we'll adapt to it as a society. But right now I'm kind of doing a lot of thinking about where that could take us. There's a book that I keep recommending. So I may have done too good a job because nobody can get it now. But it's called A Culture of Fact by Barbara Shapiro. And it's about where the idea of facts came from. So there was a point a few hundred years ago when, at least speaking of like Western civilizations, Western cultures, that the idea of facts didn't really exist. And it came into existence through a process that she traces it back to the way the British judicial system worked. It was like, how do you develop an algorithm for determining a fact? You're a judge in the medieval English judicial system. You ride into some town out in the middle of nowhere. Everyone agrees a murder happened 6 months ago. You've got to figure out who did it. There's no physical evidence. There's no recorded evidence. So you've got to establish the facts of the matter through an algorithmic process that starts with swearing people in and interviewing them and throwing out certain kinds of evidence like hearsay evidence that are deemed unsound, and impaneling a jury and all that. So she traces the idea of facts back to that algorithmic process, and then talks about how it spread from there into scientific discourse and how people wrote history, journalism. So it's an interesting book to read now, just because it talks again about the algorithm for determining facts as a group that we can agree on. And from a CS point of view, if there's an algorithm, then you should be able to just it's just a small matter of running software, right? So, maybe that's a way that we could get out of this current mess that we're in. So, yeah.
Hi, Neal. I was wondering if you could share a bit about what environment you're in and tools you use when you do your best work. What makes you productive?
Get up in the morning, try not to get super irritated or stressed out by anything, which basically means not exposing myself to the internet. Go into a quiet place, sit down with a pen, and just try to write. Pretty uncomplicated overall. It's getting into the flow state, which is in a lot of professions is sort of what you have to do in order to be productive, as many people here probably know.
If you were born 5,000 years from now, which one of the 7 human factions or subspecies would you rather want to be in?
From 7 Eves? I think I'd be one of the diggers down in the ground, which is not one of the 7, so it's a trick answer. But I don't know. I mean, they're all different. That's part of what makes the book hopefully interesting to people is asking that exact question, right? Probably one of the people down in the hole. Thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
When in your earlier comments about kind of this deconstruction or cultural disagreement about facts, I was reminded of the Diamond Age, which was kind of the pendulum in some ways was swung to a hyper-Victorianism.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, are those, are those themes related? I mean, or I just basically, are they related? Do you see a pendulum in time in terms of our cultural kind of agreement on?
Yeah, I mean, in Diamond Age, it's cleaner in a way because people have just drawn boundaries and set up clear distinctions. So if you see somebody who lives in a particular place, dressed as a particular way, you pretty much know everything about them, their culture, what they believe, and so on. And so, and that's not what we've got now, right? We're in this weird blended kind of situation where, you can encounter someone at random who just has this radically different view of it's the Thanksgiving dinner problem, and so yeah, it's a related topic, but at the time I wrote that, I thought I was sort of engaging in humorous exaggeration. I didn't think it was going to happen. So, thanks. Yeah.
At risk of forcing you to generalize too much how you feel, would you say you've gotten more or less optimistic with time? And are there any things that in particular give you hope that our problems are soluble?
Well, it's funny, right? Because in terms of standard of living and a lot of measurable, quantifiable indices of how we're doing really well, right? So that's the weird thing about where we are right now is that Eric Weinstein has pointed this out, that on one level, everything is turning to shit, and just terrible things are happening in the political sphere and the media sphere, and yet, for a lot of people, it doesn't seem to make any difference yet. I mean, it enrages us when we look at Twitter or whatever, but it feels like the other shoe hasn't dropped in terms of a radical decline in standard of living or anything of that nature. So so I think you can certainly read it both ways. Right now I'm super concerned about some of the topics I've been talking about. I don't know if that's exactly the same as being pessimistic. I think it's definitely points out areas where change needs to happen, but that's kind of on a different orthogonal set of that. You've got optimistic, pessimistic. You've got sort of complacent versus totally enraged. So I think I'm in the kind of enraged, optimistic quadrant, if that helps. But I don't know if that's a rational place to be.
Hi. I have a follow-up question actually about the process of transcribing your work from written to digital form.
Yeah.
So I was curious how much editing, if any, you do during that process? Because I know for myself in things that I write purely digitally, and you can almost feel constrained when you're editing by what you already have on the page. Yeah. And so I was wondering if you found yourself either wanting to or holding yourself back from editing while doing that transcription from one medium to another.
Well, I usually do some editing by hand with pen, which goes really fast because you can just scratch things out or whatever. And it's good because you can see what has changed. You've got a visible record of the edit trail. And then you're correct that when I then type it in, it's a chance for me to do more cleanup on it. But it is just that. It tends to be just cleanup. And maybe tossing in a phrase here and there, but by that point it's pretty gelled. I would say it's not. I'm not going to be making big changes during that typing process.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. All right.
Kind of a nitty-gritty question, but do the characters in the second half of Fall have some correspondence to the characters in the first half, like the minor? Do you have a cheat sheet somewhere of this is Tom from Ameristan?
Oh, well, I mean, there's some sort of fairly obvious examples of that. I don't think there's not a lot hidden, if that's what you mean. I mean, there's some pretty obvious examples of people who've crossed over. But if it's just a sort of one of the secondary characters, in the second half, the bit world part, it could be anyone. Yeah.
So I think that's it.
Okay.